Absolutely delighted today to be joined by the legendary Gary Boomer. Fantastic to spend some time here with you on the Audit Opinion. Gary, for those who don't instantly recognize you and know your name, would you mind giving a brief introduction?
Well, thanks, Mark, for inviting me. It's excited to be here today. I'm the founder of Boomer Consulting. We're based, I used to say out of Manhattan, and everyone thought Manhattan, New York, but I said it was Manhattan, Kansas. And I said it wasn't the end of the world, but you could see it from there. And I started my career with the Big Four and then was a partner in a 50-person regional firm up until about 25 years ago. And I started Boomer Consulting. And our primary focus originally was on IT and firm management. And when I began talking with firms and firm leaders, I saw that it was much broader than that. It had process improvement, it had talent development, attraction. It had how do you grow your firm. So we developed this consulting company, and there's 22 people today. And our primary focus is not only on the consulting, but more on communities and how you can benefit from your peers.
What are you seeing right now as some of the big trends that are happening in the accounting profession as we talk about transformation?
Well, we can't discount AI. It's it's here, and the train has already left the station. And if you're not on the train, I suggest you get on as quickly as possible. But AI certainly is one. The other would be the organizational or governance of firms. Uh, Most firms were set up as partnerships or are managed by a managing partner, uh, but they really need more like to be like corporate governance. They're too slow in making decisions, and so I think exponential organizations is something that I've introduced to the accounting profession. I think it's a way of governing your firm to have the participation of leaders at all levels, not just in the executive suite. That includes leaders who are not CPAs as well as CPA leaders. And then I think the other thing that people aren't really thinking about today is all this intellectual property or capital that have created, and they really haven't put that on the balance sheet or even protected it. And that's something that is a trend in business today. We're seeing high valuations for intellectual property in many industries and professions. And the blockchain has allowed us to protect that for under $100 on the blockchain. And that's the start of the process of getting a trademark, registering that, or even a patent. And here in the US, a patent minimum is probably 2 years and $30,000. So having some protection during that process is important as well. So I like to say those three things are really key. Uh, we can get into the talent issue. I've got my opinions on how that is changing, but everyone has said for years that we lack talent. I say we lack the right skills of that talent, and we've got to think differently about talent than we have in the past.
What are you seeing in terms of what the best firms are doing in terms of artificial intelligence and the deployment of this new technology?
Well, the one thing they're doing is providing their employees with training. Now, many people have focused on the technical training, CPE as we know it, but in the future, I think we're going to have to look at broader training and upskilling our existing people. And I like to say that I'm not worried about CPAs who embrace AI and learn AI. I'm worried about those that don't. In other words, the valuable or super employee is going to be what I call the who, or the orchestrator, who is able to utilize these AI agents as if they were junior accountants, or if they were uh, uh, another skill set within their process that they can automate, and think of them like Lego blocks. If I have one person can use the same Lego blocks in an engagement, or multiple people can use the same Legos, that's far more powerful multiplier than if I draw from a pool of talent where only one partner can use that person on one engagement at a time. So we're seeing agents in audit, we're seeing agents in tax. And since we're primarily focused on the operation of the firm, we're looking more at the operational planning agents, HR agents, and how do you run the practice, which I feel is very important for the firms, because if they know how to do that themselves, they can also use that as a service line with their clients. And that's part of the advisory services and consulting practices that all the large firms are uh, engaged in today and trying to expand.
That brings up a really interesting perspective on this, Gary, because I've certainly seen some of the earliest adopters of some of the previous, waves of technology. You think of maybe IBM as being a great example, who really transformed from a hardware business to releasing the Watson capability, and in one fell swoop took some of the things that they'd developed internally out into the market to offer a service to others. Do you see that as being one of the potential upsides here for firms who are maybe just focused internally and thinking about their own processes and their efficiencies? It sounds like what you're talking about is actually there's more of an external, once you've had those reps and you've learned those skills, there's a broader client base that you could potentially be taking those learnings to and delivering some high value advisory services to.
Without a doubt, that's the whole strategy here, because CPA firms are small businesses. They just don't look at themselves as small businesses because they think of themselves as audit and tax practices, and they think they're different. But they're a small business, a $5 million, $100 million firm, or $1 billion firm. They're still small businesses, and they have the same problems that their best clients have. And so if they solve the problem internally, that is the value that their best clients are asking for in the services, not even as much technical. Uh, and they want them to look into the future and be more predictive rather than just historians and commenting about the accuracy of the financial information or compliance work.
What trends are you hearing from firms around what clients are looking for from a modern accounting firm? What are the kind of things that are top of mind for the leaders that you're working with that are coming from the clients' voices, Gary?
Well, they're looking at how they can transform and adopt AI in their businesses in order to remain relevant and sustain success. And you'll hear me say oftentimes the best clients. I think often get caught up with too many clients, and we try to save the bottom 80%. But if you solve the problems for your top 20%, you probably have service lines that will always be relevant in the marketplace, and you will improve your client base as you go forward.
What are some of the areas that firms should be thinking about as almost the infrastructure or the things that are going to set them up for success when it comes to artificial intelligence?
That's so true of our profession and business in general, is that procrastination is one of your biggest obstacles. And I've been fortunate to have Dan Sullivan as a coach for 30 years. And Dan has always said that good things only happen when you're in motion. And there aren't experts out there in the accounting profession in AI. We're all learning as we're going, but we're willing to take some risk. And one of the things, the profession has an immunity system, just like any profession, that why change if you're making good money? Or why do we break what isn't broken to fix it and improve it? And you add value in three ways: through leadership, relationships, and innovation. And I've always been one to want to leave it better than I found it. And I'm not satisfied to just status quo. Now, I think what firms need to do is get on that train and train their people, and they will figure out pretty quickly, uh, especially the younger people coming into the profession. They don't want to do these tasks that are replicated and can be automated. And we haven't done a good job in most firms of automating many of the tasks. And that's happening today, not only with the providers of software, but also with the leading firms. They're documenting their processes and they're standardizing those processes, and then they're automating the process. We say the three big challenges here are change management, process management, and project management. And those three skills are skills that most CPA firms don't go hire. They hire the technical skills. So assessing where you are today, and what's your purpose? In other words, we hear burnout all the time. I'm hearing it from partners. I'm hearing it from people that are leaving firms. Well, people, uh, when they're in burnout, if you don't have a purpose, a vision that's been communicated, and a plan where they can have a hope for a better tomorrow, that they're going to leave or do something different. And that's why in exponential organizations, they start with purpose and then vision. And that purpose is bigger than any one individual for a firm. Like my massively transformative purpose has been, I couldn't explain this for years, but it's really been to inspire and guide financial professionals and their best clients to the four freedoms: a purpose, relationship, time, and money. And what I've seen in our profession is we get those in reverse. We focus on the money, the time, then the relationship, and then the purpose. But if you'll reverse those, I think that you'll naturally become uh, transformative over your entire career. You know, I can think about the technology that's transformed me, but I also look at the number of jobs that I've had in our profession, and basically with two companies, uh, but different different positions. I like to refer to myself today as the dot connector and visionary. And some would say visionaries, they don't get caught doing any real work. Well, one of the problems we have in firms is you don't have time to think. And you don't get in any depth if you don't take time to think. That's one reason coaching and going to these circle meetings is so valuable to me, because it gives time to think and be around some of the best thought leaders in our profession. And going to a large conference where there's 5,000 people, you just don't have the relationship of when you break out in a small group of 2, 3, or 4 people. And that's why Zoom and other teams and other tools have been so great, is that you don't have to travel and spend uh, all that time. While personal relationships and getting together in person are great, I don't think you have to do it all the time to benefit.
And you've talked here about the exponential organization, or others might refer to it as in a different guise, the movement away from a partnership decision-making structure towards a more corporate C-suite type structure. What are you seeing from firms in this particular area? Could you elaborate on the trend that you highlighted at the start of this conversation, and what is happening for CPA firms that's driving this review of the leadership model?
Well, it depends on the size of the firm, but as a general rule, what they're doing are looking for people that have experience or have been trained in technology, for CIO, HR, operations, uh, business development, and marketing, rather than taking a partner and taking them away from their unique abilities and their skill sets that they were trained and retraining them to be a marketing or business development person. They're actually using professionals that have been trained in that and have the unique ability. We think the Colby index is very important because it tells people what their unique abilities are. And there are some people that are CPAs that are great as CIOs, but there are more people that were trained in technology and have that background that aren't CPAs that can still add value to your firm. So it's that unique ability team that we see being built. And if you look at the C-suite in the leading firms today, many of those people didn't come up as auditors or tax people. They came into the profession as an HR talent development person or a CIO. And now we have two CIOs, Chief Information Officer and Chief Innovation Officer. And there's this difference between keeping the lights on and being innovative. And a lot of firms still are focused on just keeping the lights on. And I mentioned innovation is one of the three ways to add value. So the firms that are the most successful are spending money on innovation right now and trying to spend more on that and reduce their cost of just keeping the lights on. Then they're looking at outsourcing. If they're not in the cloud, they're probably way behind. And that's one of the things they've got to do in order to take advantage of AI. Yes, there are local models, but that's not going to be for most of the firms that we work with.
And you work with quite a broad range of firms. So when it comes to this topic of looking at the leadership model of the future for the firms, is there any themes you see in terms of, is it bigger firms who are looking at this? Is it firms that have growth aspirations? What is it? What is the driver for firms to be trying to reevaluate how they're going to lead the firm in the future, Gary?
I think it's the focus of the leadership of the firm. Are they relational to their clients and listening to their clients? Or are they so focused on the technical skills that they really are just trying to deliver quality work? Both are important, and I don't want to discount the quality in any way. And that's why it takes a unique ability team. Rugged individualists are a thing of the past. It takes a team today. And when we work with smaller firms, oftentimes they have some of the skills, but not all the skills. So therefore, they're looking at outsourcing. Exponential organizations call that staffing on demand. And we often think of India, Philippines, and offshoring, but you can do that with a lot of things in your firm, including HR, if you're a small enough firm. If you're probably under 25 people, you probably don't need a full-time HR person. So you can outsource that. Same with some of the technology. So there's not one size that fits all. It's just all need some of these skills. It's the level at which they need them and can afford to put them together.
What are you seeing firms doing in this area of intellectual property? Why is that one of the top areas from your focus areas?
Well, the average patent today, depends on who you talk to, is probably worth 300,000 or more. And for many clients, especially those in bioscience, it may be worth millions of dollars. Well, they can go to the bank or not to the bank necessarily, but to lenders, and they can get a 50% loan on the value of that patent on the books. So they're seen as they're not having to give up the percentage they would in a IPO, or with intellectual or with private equity. So that is an alternative. I would suggest that you look at instant IP, and there's a good book out. You Are an IP Company, and page 135 will tell you everything you need to know in that book about how the world has changed with blockchain and what the value of getting your intellectual property documented on the blockchain improving first to use. And you can do that for under $100. And you can go on Amazon and get that book. But we're seeing that in startup companies, they're not all going for patents on everything because it takes too long. But they are documenting this on the blockchain and then taking it to a patent attorney. And it's much easier for the patent attorney to apply for that patent, and it expedites that process. And that's a trend we're seeing. If you're not aware of this, you need to be aware of it for your clients, because the clients are sitting there. It's not necessarily goodwill anymore. It's the value of the intellectual property that's on their books.
And what intellectual property might exist within an accounting firm, Gary?
Well, I'll give you an example of a firm that has done the path to partnership. In other words, every firm has a path to partnerships. The problem is that depends on which partner you ask what that path to partnership is. So having that documented has value within the firm, even documenting the firm culture and being able to use your marketing tools to document that, and having icons or marketing materials around that create intellectual property, and your brand is worth something. I can tell you that firms that have been acquired by some of this private equity have kept their own intellectual property, and the private equity has found out that that intellectual property and brand is more valuable than the private equity company brand. And so there's going to be more and more cases to hear why you want to look at that intellectual property.
And the mergers and acquisition space is a tricky area because of how much politics is involved in, to your example, which piece of tax software we're going to use. Is it mine or is it yours? And there's so much comes out in that where ultimately we need to be focused on where does the firm want to be in 5 years' time, not necessarily on which one of us is going to converge to a different platform. So that certainly resonates, and certainly what we're seeing in some of the bigger mergers out there, Gary. There's some very challenging conversations around the tech strategy and more generally around how do the organizations come together. It's one thing feeling like there's a cultural fit. It's another thing melding those two businesses to create one very cohesive business that's going after growth into the future.
Yeah, I can argue both sides of it, but I will say the private equity and a lot of the mergers and acquisitions have done to transition partners out of the profession. And it's been very good for those partners. But think of how much better the profession would be if there was a balancing of that money rather than it leaving the profession to individuals, if it were being invested back into the people that are still here. Now, I think people deserve a retirement. I think they deserve some payout, but some of these payouts have been very, very high. And if some of that money had been put back into the firm and the investments made, I think the firm would be much more viable to sustain success into the future. I predict there's going to be a lot of name changes in the top 100 over the next 5 years.
I think it's already happening, right, Gary, in terms of the number of mergers and acquisitions that are happening. The list is consolidating quite quickly, and we've got a number of new entrants, people who are coming out of nowhere as bigger groups of private equity backed firms. So there's all sorts of things going on there. But I want to come back to the fourth point you laid out at the start around talent and skills, and the topic we just discussed there around investing in the profession. I think is very pertinent to this view of, we've heard for a long time around the talent shortage. We've heard around some of the challenges around the entry criteria to become a CPA, 150 credits, and some of the other challenges that have been there as we look backwards. But you put a different perspective on this to think about, how do we develop the skills that we need in the future? Not necessarily the number of people, but the right skill sets. So would you elaborate there on how you're thinking about the talent profile, if you want to call it that, of the future CPA?
Well, I think first you have to know what their unique abilities are and what their purpose and interest is. And then probably it's going to be a personal development plan. Uh, and firms are going to have to invest in their people. How they invest uh, and the CPE they're taking is changing dramatically. I did a schedule this probably 7 years ago of how many hours the best firms are investing in their people. And it's not the 40 hours, it's probably in their initial years, it's probably closer to 150, 200 hours up front if they captured everything. So how did they reduce time? Well, you can't send them to every AICPA conference today. So there's got to be a methodology of doing some of that online. And part of it is studying for the CPA exam. Becker and others, you can do that online. But these other skills, how you develop the C-suite, how you teach people AI, that's why we came up with the Boomer Knowledge Network, and we saw we didn't have the resources to to make that what it really needed to be. So we just announced that we're partnering with Miles Education and Miles Masterclass to offer that online. It's NASBA approved, and you can kind of develop your own plan and path there. And it's as bad as it'll ever be. In other words, it's going to get better, just like AI. And they've got plenty of classes out there with some of the best instructors on AI, accounting, auditing, tax, and that will only expand. So it's the platform that really differentiates it. And if you look back, if you follow the money, generally you find out where the purpose was. Well, continuing education has driven state societies, it's driven AICPA, uh, and we haven't really recognized what all those skill sets are, and we've called them soft skills. But to run a business, you have to have that leadership development, development of managers. Those are two different things: change management, product management, process management, all those things. So having that online and being able to take it in increments of 10 minutes, I actually take some of those courses while I use the elliptical machine, and I can answer the questions and still do my elliptical at the same time. Well, I figure I'm getting in 2 for 1 there at least, because 1, it makes the elliptical time go a lot faster, and 2, I've captured 40 minutes of a 60-minute course, or maybe 60 minutes of the course. And uh, they're well documented, and they're people I wouldn't have gotten to hear had I not gone to a conference.
I think that's a great way to be trying to take in your CP and trying to absorb knowledge, Gary. I think more people should be exploring that avenue. You touched there though on some of the skills that you're seeing being more relevant, more pertinent, and use the terminology around softer skills. I think we can call that whatever we want to in terms of the non-technical skills, if you like, the non-traditional CPE, CPA skill sets. And so That's an interesting topic from my perspective, where you talk about leadership development. You talk about some of the skills I know that I've needed to use in my new role compared to when I was previously in a CPA at a big four firm. Very different skill set I needed at that point in time. So, what are like two or three skills that you're seeing people really try and major in developing in light of the technology advancements, the way that AI is trending? Where do you see a greater focus from a skills development?
I'll give you one within just the organization of the firm, which is development of managers. Most people are promoted and they eventually become a manager and haven't had really any training on how to manage people. And they have to figure it out because that's what the generation before did. But there are courses in how to speed that up, and it's a journey. It's not you attend one event and then you're a manager. On the other side, let's take AI. We know that AI is in almost every firm. Some firms are paying for it, embracing it. Other firms are trying to keep it out, just like they did the internet and other things, and I don't think they'll survive. Uh, but if you want your people to use AI and be productive, provide them with prompt training. And that too is a journey. Don't try to send them to 8 hours of prompt training. Take an hour at a time and build on that. And that's where I think Miles has done such a great job of explaining how prompting really works with the generative AI, and how most people are just asking general prompts and getting general answers, but it learns. And when I use AI today, it knows what I know about exponential organizations. It knows what about instant IP. So it's like me taking all of that knowledge and continuing to augment my own brain. So it's soon going to remember more than I do, but it helps prompt and help me think in the way I like to think.
What are you seeing in terms of how firms and solution providers are collaborating, whether it's AI, whether it's the next generation of this technology wave that's happening? How do you see those two groups coming together and working together?
Well, they have to have a safe place to do this, and they both have to share what's working and what's not working, because there's always different perspectives, and we like to act as the environment where that can happen, and I've encouraged that because I saw that early in my career with Software 1040, which was one of the early tax preparers. They would listen to me because I would ask them questions, and they didn't always do what I asked them to change, but they listened. And I think listening is a great tool for both sides. And if you look at simply transactional, y- you're just not going to get the innovation as if you look at how can we work together to improve this. And if our firm has this issue, so do thousands, if not thousands, hundreds of others. Size has a little bit of impact on the market, but not necessarily today, because the tax software out there, it's not the calculation that's the problem. And same with audit. It's getting the information in, digesting that information, and then the output and how you communicate that really adds the value from the client's perspective.
Gary, final question for you around what you see as the biggest opportunities in front of accounting firms today.
It's advisory and consulting services. The foundation is your audit practice and your tax practice in particular. Here's the challenge. Most technical tax and audit people are used to being the smartest person in the room and providing the answer. When you get into advisory and consulting, the value comes from asking questions. So it's totally a different mindset to be in the advisory. And one of the things we do to help firms in advisory is just come up with questions. And that's why the DOS question, dangers, opportunity, and strengths, if you have lunch with somebody and ask them, what's keeping you up at night? It's probably not their tax return or their audit. Or what do you see as your 3 biggest opportunities? And then how do you take your strengths to take advantage of those opportunities and reduce your risk and the dangers? And that's where I see the future of the firm. And being in strategic coach for 30 years, I've sat next to some of the leading people out there who have their own small business and they're entrepreneurs. And they tell me about the accounting profession. What the accountants give away is some of the most valuable information that they're seeking, while the compliance work, they feel like they're being overcharged. So how do we add 10 times value is the question.
Gary, I've really enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you very much for all of the wisdom and expertise that you shared with everyone today.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's always a pleasure, and I'm always available to focus in on other areas. So we certainly at Boomer Consulting appreciate the support that you've given and the relationships that you've developed within our communities, and look forward to a continued future that's brighter for all.